My name is Amber Mitchell, 28 years old, and 3 years ago I thought I married the love of my life. Until the day James slapped me so hard I hit our living room floor. All because his mother Eleanor whispered something in his ear. What he didn't expect was for my purse to spill open, revealing the secret I'd been keeping for just 8 weeks. But what truly changed everything was when our neighbor Marcus walked in and said the words that would save me. If you're watching this from a toxic relationship, know that there's a way out. Please like and subscribe if you've ever felt trapped by family manipulation, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. James and I met at a charity gala in Boston 5 years ago. I was volunteering at the event, checking in guests at the reception table when he approached with a warm smile and kind eyes. He made a joke about the tiny appetizers that made me laugh, and somehow we ended up talking for nearly an hour before my supervisor noticed and gently reminded me of my duties. I come from a middle-class family in Boston's suburbs. My dad worked as an accountant, my mom as a high school English teacher. They raised me with solid values, but also encouraged independence. I went to a state college on partial scholarship, worked part-time jobs to cover expenses, and graduated with a degree in marketing. When I met James, I was working for a small advertising agency, building my career one project at a time. James, on the other hand, came from a more privileged background. His father was a successful corporate attorney who passed away when James was in law school. His mother Eleanor had never worked outside the home, but maintained their social standing through charity work and community involvement. James followed his father's footsteps into law, and when we met, he had just been made a junior partner at his firm. Our courtship was like something from a romance movie. Weekend trips to charming bed and breakfasts in the countryside, surprise picnics in the park, handwritten notes left on my windshield. James was thoughtful, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, I didn't hesitate to say yes. The wedding was beautiful, but looking back, I should have noticed the red flags. Eleanor insisted on being involved in every decision, from the venue to the menu to my dress. James always sided with her, saying, "Mom knows best about these things," or "let's just make Mom happy." I brushed it off as pre-wedding stress and told myself that after the honeymoon, things would settle into a natural rhythm. Our first year of marriage was mostly happy. We bought a beautiful suburban home last year, with a spacious yard and enough bedrooms for the family we hoped to start someday. James's career continued to flourish, and I had been promoted to account manager at my agency. From the outside, we were the perfect young couple building our dream life together. Eleanor lived about 30 minutes away in the family home where James grew up. Initially, she visited once every few weeks for Sunday dinner. She was always polite to me, but there was an undercurrent of criticism in her comments. "The roast is a little dry, dear, but you'll learn with practice," or "I see you've decorated with those modern pieces." Interesting choice. James never seemed to notice, or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. As time went on, I began to notice how James's demeanor changed when his mother was around. The confident, decisive man I married would become deferential, constantly seeking her approval. He'd change plans we'd made if Eleanor suggested an alternative, consult her before making household purchases, and quote her opinions as if they were irrefutable facts. Despite this growing concern, I was ready to start a family. James and I had discussed having children before we married, and both agreed we wanted to become parents while we were still young. Eleanor, however, had other ideas. Whenever the subject came up in her presence, she would say things like, "James needs to focus on becoming a senior partner before taking on the responsibility of children," or "modern couples are waiting until their mid-30s now, you know." After one such comment at a family gathering, I pulled James aside and asked why he didn't correct his mother about our plans. He seemed genuinely confused. "Mom just wants what's best for us," he said. "Maybe she has a point about waiting." That night, I lay awake beside my sleeping husband, realizing that we had never made a significant decision without Eleanor's implicit approval. Still, I loved James and believed in our marriage. So I suggested we compromise, stop using contraception, and see what happened naturally. James agreed, though he made me promise not to tell his mother we were trying. My best friend Stephanie had warned me about James's relationship with Eleanor from the beginning. "He's too attached to his mom's apron strings," she'd said after meeting them at our engagement party. I had defended him then, explaining that they'd grown closer after his father died. Now, I was starting to wonder if Stephanie had seen something I'd missed. As our second anniversary approached, I realized the perfect marriage I thought I had was largely a facade. But I still believed we could work through our issues. James was a good man at heart, and I was committed to our relationship. I just needed to find a way to establish healthier boundaries with Eleanor. Over the past 6 months, Eleanor's presence in our lives had increased dramatically. What started as weekly Sunday dinners somehow morphed into 3 or 4 visits per week. She'd drop by unannounced with groceries she thought we needed, or to deliver dry cleaning she'd picked up for James since it was on her way, it wasn't, or simply to check if we were eating properly. James never seemed bothered by these intrusions. In fact, he encouraged them, giving her a key to our home for emergencies without discussing it with me first. When I expressed discomfort about this, he looked at me as if I'd suggested something outrageous. "She's my mother, Amber," he said with an edge to his voice I'd rarely heard before. "She's only trying to help us." But help wasn't what it felt like to me. Eleanor had a talent for making me feel inadequate in my own home. She'd run her finger along a shelf and examine it for dust, rearrange the dishes I'd just put away because they fit better another way, or open our refrigerator and make disapproving noises at its contents. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work to find Eleanor in our kitchen, completely reorganizing our pantry. "Oh, Amber, you're home early," she said without looking up from her task. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't find the sugar when I came to borrow some, so I thought I'd help you get things in order." I stood in the doorway, watching this woman dismantle the organization system I'd spent a weekend creating, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "Actually, Eleanor, I had a specific system. Everything was organized by frequency of use." She laughed lightly, as if I'd told a mildly amusing joke. "Dear, this is how I taught James a proper pantry should be arranged. Alphabetical is so much more sensible." Rather than argue, I retreated to our bedroom and called Stephanie. "She's marking her territory," Stephanie said bluntly. "Like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant." "That's a lovely image," I replied, though I couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. "Have you talked to James about how this makes you feel?" I had tried, multiple times. But James had a way of turning conversations about his mother into accusations about my sensitivity. "You know Mom doesn't mean anything by it," was his standard response. Or, "She's just trying to be helpful." And my personal favorite, "You're overreacting." The situation came to a head at a dinner party we hosted for James's colleagues from the law firm. I had spent days planning the menu, cleaning the house, and making sure everything would be perfect. Eleanor arrived 3 hours early, ostensibly to help, but proceeded to critique everything from my choice of wine to the placement of the napkins. By the time guests arrived, my confidence was shattered, but I put on a brave face. The evening seemed to be going well until Eleanor raised her glass during dinner and said, "I think we should acknowledge all the work James put into tonight. He even found time to select these lovely centerpieces despite his busy schedule." I had chosen and arranged the centerpieces myself, a detail James knew perfectly well. I waited for him to correct his mother, to acknowledge my efforts, but he simply smiled and accepted the compliment. Later, when everyone had gone and I confronted him about it, James dismissed my feelings. "It's not a big deal, Amber. Mom was just trying to make me look good in front of my boss." At my expense, I pointed out. "Why does everything have to be a competition with you?" he snapped. "You're too sensitive. Mom goes out of her way to include you, and you're always looking for insults where there aren't any." I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I really being oversensitive? Was I imagining the subtle digs, the territorial behavior, the way Eleanor seemed to be systematically undermining my position in my own marriage? Around this time, I met our neighbor Marcus properly for the first time. He had moved in next door about 2 months earlier, a friendly, middle-aged high school teacher who lived alone with his golden retriever. We had exchanged waves and brief greetings, but never had a real conversation until the day he found me sitting on my front step, trying not to cry after another frustrating interaction with Eleanor. "Rough day?" he asked, walking his dog past my house. Something about his kind, concerned expression broke through my facade. "Just in-law issues," I admitted. He nodded sympathetically. "I've been there. My ex-wife's mother lived with us for 5 years. How did you survive?" I asked, only half joking. "Not well, obviously, since she's my ex-wife now," he said with a wry smile. But I learned a lot about family dynamics in the process. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a friendly ear. Nothing inappropriate, just neighborly support. He would sometimes bring over extra tomatoes from his garden or offer to collect our mail when we were both working late. Once, he helped me jumpstart my car when the battery died. Small kindnesses that reminded me what normal, healthy interaction felt like. It was during this time that I missed my period. At first, I didn't think much of it. My cycle had always been somewhat irregular, especially during times of stress. But when a week passed, then 2, I picked up a pregnancy test on my way home from work. I took it the next morning while James was in the shower, and when those 2 pink lines appeared, I felt a confusing mix of joy and terror. Joy, because I had wanted this, wanted to start a family with the man I loved. Terror, because I knew, instinctively, that Eleanor would see my pregnancy as a threat to her control over James. And given how things had been going, I wasn't confident that James would choose me if forced to take sides. I decided to keep the news to myself for a few days, to find the right moment to tell James privately, before his mother could influence his reaction. I didn't know then how quickly my careful plans would unravel or how dramatically my life was about to change. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I woke up feeling slightly nauseous, which I now recognized as morning sickness. James had already left for an early meeting at the office, so I had the house to myself. I decided to take another pregnancy test, just to be absolutely certain before I told James the news. The second test confirmed what I already knew. I was pregnant, likely about 8 weeks along based on my calculations. I carefully wrapped the test in tissue and tucked it into my purse, planning to show it to James that evening during a private dinner. I had even bought a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate with, since I couldn't drink champagne. I was in the middle of planning how to tell him when my phone rang. It was James. "Hey, I forgot to tell you, Mom's coming over for the weekend," he said without preamble. My heart sank. "The whole weekend? Starting when?" "She'll be there around noon today." I told her I'd be working late, but you'll be home, right? I closed my eyes, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "Yes, I'm working from home today." "Great. Can you make up the guest room for her? And maybe prepare something nice for lunch? You know how she likes your grilled chicken salad." The irony was that Eleanor had once criticized my grilled chicken salad as pedestrian, but James had either forgotten or chosen to remember differently. "Sure," I said, already mentally rearranging my plans. The private dinner would have to wait. There was no way I could tell James about the baby with Eleanor in the house. She would find a way to make the moment about her, or worse, dampen his enthusiasm. I spent the morning cleaning the already clean house, changing the sheets in the guest room, and preparing an elaborate lunch that I hoped would meet with Eleanor's approval. By the time she arrived, precisely at noon, I was exhausted and nauseated, but had managed to set a beautiful table on our patio. "Amber, dear," Eleanor said as she air-kissed my cheeks. "You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" And so it began. I helped her bring in her overnight bag, which was large enough for a week-long stay, and showed her to the guest room she had stayed in countless times before. I'm thinking of redecorating this room, I mentioned casually as she unpacked. Maybe a new color scheme, some different furniture. Eleanor paused, a folded sweater in her hands. Why would you do that? This room is perfectly fine as it is. James has always loved this shade of blue. I bit back the retort that this was my home, not James's childhood bedroom. Just thinking it might be nice for a change, I said instead. She gave me a strange look. Change for the sake of change is rarely beneficial, dear. We made our way to the patio for lunch, where Eleanor proceeded to pick at her food while making observations about the garden that could use more attention and asking pointed questions about James's work schedule. He's been putting in so many hours lately, she said. I do hope you're being supportive. This partnership track is crucial for his future. Our future, I corrected gently. And yes, I'm very supportive of James. Eleanor smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, dear. Though I sometimes wonder if you truly understand the demands of his profession. My late husband often said that his success was largely due to my unfailing support at home. The implication was clear. I wasn't measuring up to Eleanor's standard of wifely devotion. As lunch progressed, the combination of morning sickness, stress, and Eleanor's subtle digs became overwhelming. I excused myself to use the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and took several deep breaths. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. When had I become so timid, so afraid of displeasing others that I'd lost my own voice? This wasn't the Amber who had worked her way through college, who had earned promotions based on her creativity and determination. This was someone else, someone diminished. When I returned to the patio, I found Eleanor had moved to the living room and was on the phone. From her hushed tone and the way she abruptly ended the call when she saw me, I suspected she was talking to James. Is everything okay? I asked. Perfectly fine, she said with a bright, false smile. Just checking in with James about dinner plans. I began clearing the lunch dishes, aware of Eleanor watching me with an assessing gaze. When I returned from the kitchen, she was rearranging the throw pillows on my couch. I was thinking, she said without looking up, that the guest room would make a lovely home office for James. He mentioned wanting a space to work from home occasionally, and that room gets such nice light in the mornings. My heart rate accelerated. The guest room was the room I'd been mentally converting into a nursery. It was the perfect size and location, far enough from the master bedroom for privacy, but close enough to hear a baby monitor. Actually, I said, surprising myself with my firmness, we have plans for that room. Eleanor finally looked at me, her eyebrows raised. Oh! What plans? I hesitated, not ready to reveal my pregnancy, but unwilling to back down. Just future plans. James and I have discussed it. She gave me a patronizing smile. I speak with James nearly every day, dear. He hasn't mentioned any plans for that room. Before I could respond, I heard the front door open. James was home, hours earlier than expected. In here, Eleanor called out, her eyes still fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. James entered the living room, his expression unreadable. He kissed his mother's cheek before giving me a perfunctory peck that felt more like obligation than affection. You're home early, I said, trying to sound normal despite the tension crackling in the air. Mom texted me, he replied. Said there was something we needed to discuss as a family. I glanced at Eleanor, who was watching the exchange with thinly veiled satisfaction. Whatever was about to happen, she had orchestrated it. James, why don't you and I have a private word first? Eleanor suggested, patting the couch beside her. I felt invisible, excluded from a conversation that apparently concerned me. I'll give you some privacy, I said, turning to leave the room. No need, dear, Eleanor said. This won't take long. I stood awkwardly in the doorway as Eleanor leaned close to James and began whispering in his ear. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see James's expression darkening with each word. His eyes flicked to me, then back to his mother, then to me again, filled with something I'd never seen directed at me before: suspicion, anger, and betrayal. Eleanor's whispering continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. James's face transformed before my eyes, flushing red as his jaw clenched and unclenched. When Eleanor finally pulled away, she kept one hand on his arm, as if to steady him, her eyes never leaving his face. "Is it true?" James asked, his voice so low I barely heard him. I shifted uncomfortably, completely lost. "Is what true?" He stood abruptly, causing Eleanor to flinch in manufactured concern. "Don't play dumb, Amber. You've been lying to me all this time." My mind raced, trying to understand what could possibly have prompted this reaction. The only secret I was keeping was my pregnancy, and there was no way Eleanor could know about that. "James, I honestly don't know what you're talking about," I said, taking a cautious step toward him. "The neighbor," he spat out. "Marcus. Mom saw you with him when I was at work. Multiple times." I blinked, momentarily speechless. "Marcus? Our next-door neighbor? What about him?" James advanced toward me, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "She saw you invite him into our house when I wasn't home. She saw how you two looked at each other. How long has it been going on, Amber? How long have you been making a fool of me?" The absurdity of the accusation might have made me laugh if James didn't look so frighteningly serious. Eleanor sat on the couch, her expression a masterclass in concerned sympathy, but I caught the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "James, that's ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Marcus is our neighbor. Yes, he's been in our house, when he helped me jumpstart my car and when he brought over some extra tomatoes from his garden. You knew about both those times because I told you. What about yesterday?" James demanded. "Mom saw you sitting on the porch steps with him for over an hour." I tried to remember yesterday. Marcus had walked by with his dog while I was getting the mail. We'd exchanged maybe 2 minutes of pleasantries about the weather before he continued on his way. "That didn't happen," I said firmly. "Marcus walked by while I was checking the mail. We spoke for maybe 2 minutes. Are you calling my mother a liar?" James's voice rose dangerously. Eleanor placed a hand on her chest, the picture of wounded innocence. "I know what I saw, dear. Perhaps Amber's memory is selective." The insinuation hung in the air between us. I looked from Eleanor's smug face to James's angry one, realizing with a sickening clarity that this had been her plan all along. She had been sowing seeds of doubt, waiting for the right moment to suggest I was unfaithful. And James, who had been conditioned his entire life to trust his mother's word above all others, was primed to believe her. "This is insane," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I have never been unfaithful to you, James. Never. Marcus is just a neighbor, nothing more. Your mother is manipulating you. Can't you see that?" James's face contorted with rage. "How dare you accuse my mother of lying? After everything she's done for us, for you. What has she done for me except criticize and undermine me at every turn?" I shot back, my own anger finally breaking through. "She's been trying to come between us from day one, and you've been too blind to see it." Eleanor let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "James, I never thought she harbored such resentment toward me. I've only ever tried to help. By spreading lies about me?" I challenged, turning to face her directly. "What possible reason would I have to cheat on James? I love him. We're trying to start a family together." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a tactical error. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, and a flash of something dark and possessive crossed her face before she composed herself. "A family?" she repeated, her voice honey-sweet with poison at its center. "Is that what this is about? You're trying to trap my son." "Trap him?" I echoed incredulously. "We're married. We've talked about having children since before we were engaged." "James told me he wanted to wait," Eleanor said smoothly. "He wants to focus on his career right now. Isn't that right, James?" James looked conflicted for the first time since entering the room. "Well, yes, but Amber and I did discuss." So you admit you've been trying to get pregnant against his wishes? Eleanor interrupted, seizing on the momentary hesitation. Is that why you've been so secretive lately? Or is there more to it than that? The implication was clear. She was suggesting that if I was pregnant, the baby might not be James's. The accusation was so outrageous, so deeply hurtful that I couldn't form words for a moment. James was looking at me with renewed suspicion. Is that true? Have you been trying to get pregnant behind my back? Not behind your back, I managed to say. We agreed to stop using contraception and see what happened naturally. That was a mutual decision, James. You were there for the conversation. But you didn't tell me if it happened, he countered. Have you been keeping secrets from me, Amber? I felt cornered, trapped in a no-win situation. If I admitted I was pregnant now, in this hostile atmosphere with Eleanor's poisonous influence, it would forever taint what should have been a joyful revelation. If I denied it, I would be lying, which would only make things worse when the truth inevitably came out. I think your silence speaks volumes, Eleanor said into the tense quiet. Something in me snapped. Years of swallowing my feelings, of making excuses for James's blind spot where his mother was concerned, of trying to earn the approval of a woman who had decided to hate me from the start, all came rushing to the surface. You know what, Eleanor? I'm done. I'm done trying to please you. I'm done pretending we have a relationship. I'm done watching you manipulate my husband and poison our marriage. This is between James and me, and you need to back off. Eleanor recoiled as if I'd slapped her, eyes wide with manufactured shock. James, are you going to let her speak to me this way? James's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. For one hopeful moment, I thought he might finally see through his mother's manipulations. Then his expression hardened, and he turned to me with cold fury in his eyes. Apologize to my mother, he demanded. No, I said quietly. I won't apologize for telling the truth. Everything happened so quickly after that. James moved toward me, his face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. Eleanor's whispered poison had done its work too well. I saw his hand rise, registered the intent in his eyes a split second before it happened. The slap caught me across the cheek with such force that I lost my balance, stumbling backward until I hit the floor. My purse, which had been hanging on my shoulder, flew off and hit the hardwood with a thud, its contents spilling across the polished surface. The shock of what had just happened froze all three of us in place. James stood over me, his raised hand still suspended in air, horror dawning on his face as the reality of what he'd done began to sink in. Eleanor remained on the couch, her initial satisfaction giving way to panic as she realized things had gone further than she intended. And there, rolling across the floor between us like a silent accusation, was the pregnancy test with its two unmistakable pink lines. James's eyes followed the small plastic stick as it came to rest near his feet. He bent down slowly, picking it up with trembling fingers. Recognition, shock, and shame washed over his face in rapid succession. Amber, he whispered, all anger gone from his voice. You're pregnant. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang, the cheerful chime surreally at odds with the scene in our living room. None of us moved to answer it. The bell rang again, followed by a knock. Amber? James? It's Marcus. You guys okay in there? I thought I heard a commotion. Eleanor sprang into action, smoothing her skirt and moving toward the door. I'll handle this. But she was too late. The door opened, and Marcus stepped into the entryway. He'd been over enough times to feel comfortable letting himself in when invited, and James had mentioned earlier in the week that he wanted to borrow Marcus's pressure washer for the weekend. Marcus took in the scene before him, me on the floor with a reddening cheek, James standing over me with the pregnancy test in his hand, Eleanor frozen halfway to the door. His eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. I saw everything through the window, he said, his voice calm but firm. I've already called the police. The room fell into stunned silence at Marcus's words. James paled visibly, the pregnancy test still clutched in his hand as the full implications of what had just happened and what was about to happen sank in. Eleanor was the first to recover, her instinct for self-preservation kicking in as she rushed to damage control. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice honey-sweet as she approached Marcus. "We were having a family discussion that got a little heated, that's all. There's absolutely no need for police involvement." Marcus didn't even glance at Eleanor. Instead, he moved past her and came directly to me, crouching down to my level. "Are you okay, Amber?" he asked quietly, his eyes filled with genuine concern. I touched my cheek, which was still stinging from the slap. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a kaleidoscope of emotions: fear, humiliation, anger, and a strange sort of relief that the facade had finally cracked. "I think so," I managed to say. Marcus offered his hand and helped me to my feet. Only then did he turn to face James. "You don't hit women," he said simply. "Not ever. Not your wife. Not anyone." James seemed to shrink under Marcus's steady gaze. "I didn't mean to," he said weakly. "I've never done anything like that before. I don't know what came over me." "I do," Marcus replied, his voice level but hard as steel. "You let someone else get in your head and override your own judgment. You chose to believe the worst about your wife without even giving her a chance to explain. And then you chose to use your physical advantage to intimidate and harm her. Those were all choices, James." Eleanor had been watching this exchange with growing alarm. Now she inserted herself between the two men, her face a mask of maternal concern. "James is under tremendous pressure at work," she said. "And then to come home and find out his wife has been keeping secrets, well, anyone would react badly." Marcus looked at Eleanor with something like pity. "Ma'am, I've been a high school teacher for 20 years. I know manipulation when I see it, and I know the damage it can do. What I witnessed today wasn't a son defending his mother's honor. It was a grown man being puppeteered into abusing his wife." "How dare you?" Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls in a performance of outrage. "I would never encourage my son to be violent." "Not explicitly," Marcus agreed. "But you've been laying the groundwork for months. I've seen it. The constant visits, the criticism thinly veiled as helpful suggestions, the way you undermine Amber at every opportunity. You created the conditions for this to happen." I stood there, watching the stranger defend me more effectively than my own husband ever had, and felt a surge of gratitude mixed with profound sadness. How had it come to this, that a neighbor of less than 3 months could see what James had been blind to for years? James had been silent during this exchange, staring at the pregnancy test in his hand as if it might contain answers to questions he hadn't even formulated yet. Now he looked up, his face a study in conflicted emotions. "Amber, I'm so sorry," he said, taking a step toward me. "I don't know what happened. I would never intentionally hurt you. You know that, right?" The desperation in his voice might have moved me on any other day. But standing there with my cheek still stinging, the contents of my purse scattered across the floor like the pieces of my broken marriage, I couldn't find the familiar impulse to smooth things over, to make excuses for him. "Don't," I said quietly, taking a step back. "Just don't, James." The sound of sirens in the distance punctured the tense atmosphere. Eleanor's eyes widened in genuine fear. "James, this could affect your career," she said urgently. "We need to clear this up before the police arrive." Always the career, I thought bitterly. Never the marriage, never the family we were trying to build. Just the precious career and the status it brought. James seemed torn, looking from his mother to me to Marcus, who still stood protectively at my side. "What's going to happen?" he asked, his voice small, like a child's. "The police will take statements from everyone," Marcus explained calmly. "They'll document Amber's injury. Then they'll decide whether to make an arrest based on what they find." "Arrest?" Eleanor repeated, aghast. "For a family disagreement? This is ridiculous. Amber, tell them you don't want to press charges. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding." The manipulation was so transparent now that I could almost see the strings she was trying to pull. But they no longer reached me. Something had broken free inside me the moment James's hand connected with my face, some invisible tether that had kept me bound to this dysfunctional dynamic. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. James hit me because you convinced him I was cheating, which is a lie. You've been trying to drive a wedge between us from the beginning, and today you succeeded. Congratulations, Eleanor." The sirens grew louder, and blue and red lights flashed through the front windows. 2 police officers, a man and a woman, approached our door, which still stood open from Marcus's entrance. "We received a call about a domestic disturbance," the male officer said, his eyes scanning the room and taking in the scene. Eleanor immediately stepped forward, social polish firmly in place. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. My son and his wife were having a disagreement, and this neighbor," she gestured dismissively at Marcus, "overreacted." The female officer looked past Eleanor to me. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" I touched my cheek again, feeling the heat of what would likely be a bruise by morning. "I don't think so." "Can you tell us what happened here?" she asked, moving closer while her partner remained by the door, keeping an eye on James. I took a deep breath, aware that whatever I said in the next few minutes would irrevocably alter the course of my marriage and my life. Eleanor was watching me with warning in her eyes, silently commanding me to minimize what had happened. James looked shell-shocked, still holding the pregnancy test like it was both precious and dangerous. "My husband slapped me," I said simply. "Hard enough to knock me to the floor. It was after his mother told him I was having an affair with our neighbor, which isn't true." The officer nodded, making notes. "Had this happened before? The physical violence?" "No, never. But the accusations and manipulation from my mother-in-law have been ongoing for years." "That's a lie," Eleanor interjected. "I have only ever wanted what's best for my son and his marriage. Amber has been increasingly paranoid and hostile toward me for months." The male officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, please let us conduct our interview. You'll have a chance to give your statement." While the female officer continued speaking with me, her partner approached James. "Sir, I need you to step outside with me." "Am I being arrested?" James asked, his voice barely audible. "We're just going to talk for now," the officer replied non-committally. As James was led outside, still clutching the pregnancy test, Eleanor's composed facade began to crack. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice rising. "My son is a respected attorney. Do you have any idea what an arrest would do to his reputation? His career?" "Mrs. Mitchell," the female officer said firmly, "I understand you're concerned for your son, but right now our priority is ensuring everyone's safety and getting accurate statements about what occurred." Marcus, who had been a quiet, steady presence throughout, finally spoke up. "Officers, I witnessed the assault through the window before I entered. I'm willing to give a statement." Eleanor's face contorted with fury. "Of course you are. You've been waiting for an opportunity like this, haven't you? Worming your way into my son's home, getting close to his wife." "Eleanor," I snapped, my patience finally exhausted. "Marcus is our neighbor. The only reason he's involved is because he happened to see your son, my husband, hit me. That's it. There is no affair, no conspiracy, no hidden agenda. Just a decent man who didn't stand by while a woman was being abused." The word abused hung in the air between us. Until that moment, I hadn't labeled what happened as abuse, hadn't allowed myself to see that no matter what the provocation, what James had done crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The police took detailed statements from all of us. I showed them the redness on my cheek, which the female officer photographed as evidence. Marcus described what he had witnessed through our living room window. Eleanor maintained that everything had been blown out of proportion, that James had barely touched me in a moment of understandable upset after learning about my deception. When they asked about the pregnancy test, which James had finally relinquished to the officers, I confirmed that I was approximately 8 weeks pregnant and had only discovered it myself a few days ago. I had been waiting for the right moment to tell James, away from his mother's influence. After nearly an hour of questioning and documentation, the officers made their decision. James was placed under arrest for domestic assault. As they led him to the police car, handcuffed and hollow-eyed, the reality of the situation seemed to finally hit Eleanor. "This is your fault," she hissed at me, all pretense of civility gone. "If you had just been the wife he needed, none of this would have happened." "No, Eleanor," I said tiredly. "This is what happens when you spend years manipulating your son into believing his wife is the enemy. This is what happens when you refuse to cut the apron strings and let him be a husband first and a son second. You didn't slap me, but your hands might as well have been guiding his." The police car drove away with James in the back seat, and Eleanor stormed out shortly after, promising to call her attorney friend immediately. Marcus offered to stay until I felt safe, but I assured him I would be okay on my own. I needed space to process everything that had happened. As I closed the door behind him, I looked around at the home James and I had built together. Just that morning, it had represented our future, the place where we would raise our child. Now it felt like the scene of a crime, a beautiful facade hiding years of slow-growing dysfunction. I placed a hand on my still flat stomach, thinking of the tiny life growing inside me, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding its existence. Whatever happened next, whatever decisions I made about my marriage and my future, I knew one thing for certain. I would not allow my child to grow up in a home where manipulation and control were normalized, where violence was excused, where one person's needs and feelings always took precedence over another's. For the first time in years, I felt completely clear about who I was and what I deserved. It was a painful clarity, born of trauma and disillusionment, but it was clarity nonetheless. The days following James's arrest passed in a blur of practical decisions and emotional upheaval. I spent the first night alone in our house, jumping at every creak and shadow before calling Stephanie the next morning. She arrived within an hour, suitcase in hand, insisting on staying with me until things stabilized. "I'm not saying I told you so," she said as she made us both tea in my kitchen, "but I've been worried about this situation for years." "You can say it," I replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "You saw what I couldn't. Or wouldn't." James was released on bail the following day with conditions that included no contact with me except through attorneys. Eleanor immediately took him to her house, from where a campaign of calls, texts, and emails began, all aimed at persuading me to drop the charges. "James is devastated," read one of Eleanor's texts. "This one mistake shouldn't ruin his entire life. Think of your baby." I was thinking of my baby. That was precisely why I couldn't simply sweep what happened under the rug and pretend everything was normal. 3 days after the incident, James's attorney reached out to arrange for him to collect some personal belongings from the house. I agreed, but requested that a neutral third party be present. To my surprise, the attorney suggested Marcus, since he was already familiar with the situation and lived nearby. "Are you comfortable with that?" Stephanie asked when I told her. "More comfortable than with anyone from James's firm or Eleanor's social circle," I admitted. So, it was that a week after the slap that changed everything. James entered our home under Marcus's watchful eye to pack a suitcase of clothes and toiletries. He looked awful, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders that would have triggered my caretaking instincts just days earlier. Now, I observed him with a strange detachment, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly when he'd finished packing. "Just for a minute." I glanced at Marcus, who nodded. "I'll wait on the porch," he said. "Just call if you need me." When we were alone, James sat heavily on the edge of our bed, the suitcase at his feet. "I am so sorry, Amber," he said, his voice breaking. "I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my head, and I still can't believe I did that to you. To anyone, but especially to you. I stood by the dresser, maintaining a safe distance. I couldn't believe it either, I said. But it happened, James. You hit me hard enough to knock me down while I was carrying your child. He flinched at my words. I didn't know about the baby. Would it have made a difference? I asked. If my purse hadn't spilled open, if you hadn't seen the test, would you have stopped at one slap? Or would Eleanor's poison have convinced you I deserved more? James looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. It wasn't like that. Mom just told me she'd seen you with Marcus multiple times when I wasn't home. She said you seemed secretive, that you changed the subject whenever she mentioned him. She thought I should know that something might be going on. And you believed her, I said flatly. Without question. Without giving me the benefit of the doubt. Without remembering that in 3 years of marriage, I've never given you any reason to doubt my faithfulness. I know, he whispered. I don't have any excuse. But you have to believe me, Amber, I've never been violent before. I was raised better than that. I let out a humorless laugh. Were you? Your mother raised you to see women as either Madonna or whore. She raised you to believe that her word is gospel and everyone else's is suspect. She raised you to think that your career matters more than your marriage. So no, James, I don't think you were raised better than that. I think you were raised exactly to become the man who would slap his wife for defying his mother. My words hit him like physical blows, each one causing him to shrink further into himself. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This broken man sitting on our bed was still the person I had loved for years, still the father of my unborn child. But he was also someone who had crossed a line I had never imagined he would cross. The police found my phone, he said after a long silence. The one Mom said she saw you texting Marcus from. She'd been going through it without my knowledge. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of Eleanor's invasion of privacy still stung. What did she find? Text messages between you and Marcus about a surprise birthday party for me, James admitted, the shame evident in his voice. That's what you were being secretive about. You were planning a party for my 30th birthday. The irony was almost too much. The surprise party had been my idea, but I'd needed help with some of the logistics since many of the guests would be James's colleagues whom I didn't know well. Marcus had offered to help with setting up in our backyard on the day of the party, and we'd exchanged a few entirely innocent texts about it. She knew, I said, realization dawning. She saw those texts and knew exactly what they were about, but she twisted them into something sinister because it served her purpose. James nodded miserably. The detective showed me the thread. There was nothing inappropriate in any of it. Just plans for my party. Mom lied to me deliberately to make me suspicious of you. And it worked, I said. Because you've always trusted her judgment over mine. Over your own, even. I'm seeing a therapist, he said abruptly. Twice a week. It was a condition of my bail, but I would have done it anyway. I need to understand why I let things get to this point, why I never stood up to her. I nodded, acknowledging the step, but not ready to applaud it. That's good. It's necessary. I want to make this right, Amber, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. I want to be a father to our baby. I want to be the husband you deserve. Part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, wanted to comfort him, to say we could work through this together. But the stronger, wiser part knew that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt the same way. I'm 8 weeks pregnant, I said instead of directly responding to his plea. I confirmed it with my doctor yesterday. Everything looks healthy so far. James's eyes filled with tears. That's wonderful news. Will you keep me updated? About appointments and things. Yes, I said. Whatever happens between us, this baby has 2 parents. I won't keep you from being involved. It was the most I could offer him at that point. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the acknowledgement of his paternal rights and responsibilities. After James left, Marcus came back inside to check on me. You okay? He asked simply. Not really, I admitted. But I will be. The following weeks brought more revelations. James's family, initially rallying around Eleanor's version of events, began to fracture as the truth emerged. His Aunt Meredith, Eleanor's sister, called me out of the blue. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she said after introducing herself. "But Eleanor has always been possessive of James, ever since he was a baby. After his father died, it got worse. I tried to warn him years ago, but he didn't want to hear it." From Meredith, I learned that Eleanor had driven away James's previous serious girlfriend in college using similar tactics: insinuations, subtle criticisms, and outright lies when necessary. That relationship had ended before it reached the point of marriage, so Eleanor's victory had been simpler and cleaner. "She thought she'd won with you too, after the wedding," Meredith explained. "She told everyone in the family that you were her choice for James, that she had guided him to pick a suitable wife. When it became clear that you had your own mind and wouldn't be controlled, she started looking for ways to discredit you." The conversation with Meredith helped me understand that what had happened wasn't just about me or even about James. It was about Eleanor's pathological need to be the most important woman in her son's life, a need that would ultimately destroy any relationship he tried to build. James continued his therapy, and after a month of separation, asked if I would join him for a session. I agreed, more out of concern for our child's future than hope for our marriage. The therapist, Dr. Levine, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had clearly heard every excuse in the book for domestic violence and wasn't interested in any of them. "James has been doing some difficult work here," she told me during that first joint session. "He's beginning to recognize the patterns of emotional manipulation that have shaped his relationships, particularly with his mother and with you." James nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been so blind," he said. "Looking back, I can see dozens of times when Mom undermined you, criticized you, or tried to come between us. And I let her do it. Worse, I defended her." "Why?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "Why couldn't you see what she was doing?" He considered this carefully before answering. "After my dad died, Mom and I became a unit. It was us against the world. She sacrificed everything for me, or at least that's what she told me, over and over. My successes were her successes. My happiness was her happiness. When I met you, you fit into her vision for my life, at first. Pretty, educated, from a good family. But once we were married, it became clear that you expected to be my priority, not her. And that threatened the dynamic we'd had for 15 years. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was honest, and it helped me understand how we had ended up where we were. The session ended with no promises or resolutions, just a better understanding of the broken foundation our marriage had been built upon. As my pregnancy progressed into the second trimester, James and I established a cautious co-parenting relationship. The criminal case against him was ongoing, with a plea deal being negotiated that would likely include probation, community service, and continued counseling. I had a restraining order against Eleanor, who had attempted to confront me at my office and had sent several disturbing emails about taking care of my grandchild the right way. Stephanie remained my rock throughout this period, staying with me until I felt safe alone again, accompanying me to doctor's appointments, and never once saying, "I told you so," though she had every right to. Marcus kept a respectful distance, but remained a friendly presence, waving when we saw each other and occasionally leaving homegrown vegetables on my porch with simple notes like, "Extra zucchini today, enjoy." For months after the incident, I met James for coffee at a neutral location to discuss the future. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, more centered and calm. "I'm moving out of Mom's house," he told me. "I found an apartment closer to work. And I've set boundaries with her. She's not allowed to discuss you or the baby, and if she violates that boundary, I leave immediately." "How's that going?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It's been challenging," he admitted with a wry smile. "She's used every tactic in her arsenal. Guilt, tears, health scares, you name it. But I'm holding firm. Dr. Levine says it's like detoxing from an addiction. There are withdrawal symptoms. I nodded, taking a sip of my decaf latte. I'm glad you're making progress. I am, he said. But I know it doesn't change what happened. I know I broke something sacred between us, and maybe it can never be repaired. I just want you to know that I'm committed to being the best father I can be, and to never, ever being the man who hurt you again. As I looked at him across the table, I felt a complex mix of emotions, residual fear and anger, yes, but also a glimmer of respect for the difficult work he was doing. I didn't know if I could ever trust him as a husband again, but perhaps, in time, I could trust him as a co-parent and as a man committed to change. One day at a time, I said, echoing a phrase Dr. Levine often used in our joint sessions. That's all any of us can do. James nodded, understanding the message behind my words. I wasn't ready to make any definitive decisions about our marriage, but I wasn't closing the door entirely either. For now, that would have to be enough for both of us. 6 months after the day that changed everything, I stood in the nursery of my new apartment, putting the finishing touches on the pale yellow walls. At 28 weeks pregnant, my belly now protruded proudly, a physical reminder of the new life that would soon join the one I was rebuilding for myself. I had found the 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex about 15 minutes from my old neighborhood. It was smaller than the house James and I had shared, but it was mine, a space free from the memories and tensions that had permeated our marital home. James had agreed to buy out my portion of the house, which had given me the financial cushion to make this fresh start. As I arranged stuffed animals in the crib, I heard a knock at the door. It was Stephanie, carrying a houseplant and a bag of takeout. Thought you might be hungry after all that nesting, she said, setting the food on my small dining table. How are you feeling today? I smiled, genuinely happy to see my friend who had been such a constant support. Good days and bad days, you know? But today is definitely on the good end of the spectrum. We settled in to eat, and Stephanie updated me on her own life, the promotion she'd received at work, the new guy she'd started dating. It felt wonderfully normal, a reminder that life continued to unfold even after traumatic ruptures. Have you heard from Eleanor? She asked cautiously, knowing it was a sensitive subject. I shook my head. Not directly. The restraining order helps. But James says she's still pushing to be involved with the baby when it arrives. And how do you feel about that? I considered the question carefully. I'm not opposed to her having a relationship with her grandchild, eventually. But there would have to be very clear boundaries, and I'm not convinced she's capable of respecting them. James and I had been working with a family therapist to establish a co-parenting framework that would prioritize our child's well-being. He continued his individual therapy as well, delving deeper into the patterns that had allowed his mother's manipulation to flourish. The criminal case had concluded with James accepting a plea deal, 1-year probation, mandatory counseling, and community service teaching legal workshops at a women's shelter. It was a fair outcome that acknowledged the seriousness of what he'd done while also recognizing his lack of prior offenses and commitment to rehabilitation. Eleanor had not fared as well in the court of family opinion. When the full story emerged, including her deliberate misrepresentation of my texts with Marcus, many of James's relatives had distanced themselves from her. His Aunt Meredith had been particularly vocal, revealing years of Eleanor's manipulative behavior that had previously gone unchallenged. She's always needed to be the center of James's world, Meredith had told me during one of our increasingly regular phone calls. When my sister realized she couldn't control you the way she controlled him, you became the enemy. It's not personal, though it feels that way. She would have done the same to any woman he truly loved. Those words had been oddly comforting, helping me understand that Eleanor's behavior wasn't a reflection of my worth as a wife or person, but rather a manifestation of her own deep-seated issues. Marcus remained a friendly presence in my life, though our interactions were casual and neighborly. He had testified at the preliminary hearing about what he witnessed that day, his clear, factual account leaving no room for Eleanor's attempts to minimize or reframe what happened. James had eventually thanked him for intervening, acknowledging that without Marcus's actions, the situation might have escalated further. As my due date approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The woman I had been before James slapped me, the woman who had slowly diminished herself to keep peace in her marriage, felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone stronger, more self-assured, unwilling to compromise on respect and safety. I had joined a support group for women who had experienced domestic violence, initially reluctant to include myself in that category. It was just one time, I had said during my first meeting, and he's not a monster. He's getting help. The group facilitator, a survivor herself, had gently challenged me. It's not about how many times it happened or whether he's getting help now. It's about acknowledging that it did happen and that you deserve better. Those words had been a turning point in my healing process. I had spent so much energy making excuses for James, minimizing Eleanor's role in our dysfunction, blaming myself for not being strong enough to withstand the pressure. Learning to place responsibility where it belonged, not to absolve myself of all accountability, but to recognize the harmful dynamics at play, had been liberating. 2 weeks before my due date, James invited me to dinner to discuss final arrangements for the baby's arrival. We met at a quiet restaurant, and for the first time in months, the conversation flowed easily between us, focused on practical matters, but tinged with the excitement of impending parenthood. "I want you to know," James said as we were finishing dessert, "that I understand if you decide to file for divorce." I wouldn't contest it. The directness of his statement took me by surprise. We had been navigating our separation without formally addressing its permanence, focusing instead on the more immediate concerns of co-parenting. "I haven't made a decision about that yet," I replied honestly. "Right now, I'm focused on bringing this baby into the world and creating a stable environment. The legal status of our relationship seems secondary to that." James nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I understand. And I want you to know that regardless of what you decide, I'm committed to being the best father I can be and to continuing the work I've been doing in therapy. The man who hurt you isn't who I want to be, for our child or for myself." Looking at him across the table, I could see genuine change in his eyes. The James who had been so easily manipulated by his mother, so quick to anger when his worldview was challenged, had been replaced by someone more thoughtful, more willing to examine his own motivations and behaviors. "One step at a time," I said, an echo of the phrase that had become something of a mantra between us. "We're both doing the best we can with a situation neither of us expected to be in." When our daughter Lily was born on a crisp autumn morning, James was there as we had agreed, standing respectfully at the head of the bed, offering encouragement but giving me and the medical team space to work. When the nurse placed our daughter in my arms, the tears in James's eyes mirrored my own, a moment of pure joy untainted by the complications of our relationship. In the months that followed, we established a co-parenting routine that prioritized Lily's needs while respecting my boundaries. James proved to be a devoted father, reliable with his scheduled times and genuinely engaged with our daughter's development. The anger management and therapy he had committed to continued to bear fruit, and slowly, cautiously, I began to trust that the change in him was real and sustainable. Eleanor remained a complex issue. After multiple sessions with our family therapist, we agreed to allow her supervised visits with Lily, always with James present and never in her home. These carefully controlled interactions were successful enough that, by the time Lily was 6 months old, Eleanor had begun her own therapy, reluctantly acknowledging that her behavior had nearly cost her a relationship with her only grandchild. As for me, I had returned to work part-time, finding a new balance between career and motherhood. The support network I had built during my pregnancy, Stephanie, my support group, even Marcus, who still occasionally left garden vegetables with congratulatory notes, remained strong, reminding me daily that I was not alone. The question of reconciliation with James lingered, unresolved but not urgent. There were moments, Watching him with Lily, when I could see glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with, now tempered by hard-won wisdom and genuine remorse. There were other moments when the memory of his hand striking my face would surface unexpectedly, a visceral reminder of a line that had been crossed. What I had learned, through therapy and reflection and the simple passage of time, was that I didn't need to rush this decision. My worth was not tied to the status of my marriage, and Lily's well-being was not dependent on her parents living under the same roof. What mattered was that she grew up in an environment free from manipulation and violence, where boundaries were respected and healthy relationships modeled. On Lily's first birthday, we held a small celebration at a local park. James arrived early to help set up, and as we worked together to arrange decorations and food, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. "Thank you," I said suddenly, surprising both of us. "For what?" James asked, genuinely puzzled. "For doing the work," I explained. "For not taking the easy path of denial or excuses. For becoming someone our daughter can look up to, even after what happened between us." James was quiet for a moment, emotion evident in his eyes. "I should be thanking you," he finally said. "You could have shut me out completely, and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you gave me the chance to be a father to Lily, to prove that I could change. Your strength and grace through all of this, it humbles me every day." As family and friends arrived for the party, I watched the gathering with a sense of wonder. My journey from that terrifying moment when James's hand struck my face to this peaceful celebration had been neither straight nor easy. There had been days of doubt and fear, nights of anger and grief. But there had also been profound growth, unexpected allies, and the discovery of a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The most important lesson I had learned was to trust my instincts, to recognize when something felt wrong even when others insisted it was right. Eleanor's manipulations had flourished in an environment where her word was never questioned, where the appearance of family harmony was prioritized over authentic relationship. By breaking that pattern, by insisting on truth and accountability even when it was painful, I had created the possibility of genuine healing for all of us, especially Lily. As I watched my daughter's face light up with delight at her first taste of birthday cake, surrounded by people who truly cared for her well-being, I knew that regardless of what the future held for James and me as a couple, we had already succeeded in the most important task, creating a foundation of respect, honesty, and love upon which our child could build her life. So, if you're watching this and you recognize any part of my story in your own experience, please know that you're not alone. Trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right, and don't be afraid to seek help. The path forward may not be clear at first, but with each step you take towards self-respect and safety, the way becomes a little brighter. I'd love to hear in the comments if any part of this story resonated with you, or if you have your own experience of recognizing and breaking free from manipulation. Please like and subscribe if you found value in my journey, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that there is life, beautiful, authentic life, after betrayal. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond.